Welcome to episode 15 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. In every episode, we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders and how they've been able to break through their business inertia and propel their business forward. Leading and motivating a regional office that has traditionally been one of the worst performing ones is no easy task. Today's guest, Scott DiGiammarino, CEO of MovieComm, knows all too well the challenges of engaging employees in a difficult environment such as this. During his tenure as a former senior executive at American Express, he shares how he motivated and inspired his diverse team, and particularly his millennial workforce through the power of movie clips. He also provides his perspective on how to create a culture of leadership. Glad to have you on the show today, Scott.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here.
So let's talk about your career journey. You have a really interesting one. You were a senior executive in a Fortune 50 company that applied a different way to connect with his employees who are all over the world. And I know this successful approach really was that catalyst to starting your company, MovieComm, which helps leaders lead through the power of movie clips. So tell us about your experience as a leader and ultimately what led you to start this type of business.
Oh, great question. Again, thanks for having me. So I'm from Boston, you can't tell by my accent. And, and I was actually a financial advisor up there. And then in 1992, I was promoted to run the Washington, D.C. region, which at the time was ranked 173rd out of 176 offices. Think about the worst environment in the history of mankind. And that's kind of what I walked into. People were negative. They weren't showing up for work. When they were showing up for work, they were doing laps around the hallway. Clients weren't being serviced properly. And it was just like one of those shows you didn't want to walk into. My wife's like, what are you thinking? But we put some systems into place. We basically have this adage, you can't change the people, you change the people. And in 1 year, it was actually from October of 1992 to October of 1993, we went from number 173 to number one. And we maintained that ranking for over 20 years. But it wasn't, I got to tell you, it wasn't easy. They say it's easier to get to number one, but it's harder to stay there. So I'll give you a quick example. Over a 6-year period, we went from one office to 207, from 32 people to 1,600, from 3 leaders underneath me to well over 100. And because we had systems in place, whenever there was a job opening up someplace else around the country, they would always come in and take my talent. So there was this talent drain, the talent suck out of our organization. And you get some pats in the back, you get some stock options, a lot of recognition, but the challenge you're left with is you have to lead with more and more junior, less tenured vice presidents.
So let's talk about when you first got there, got to the office that was in the sort of worst position. What were all those challenges that you faced when it came to really engagement and I'm assuming probably culture? And what were those things that you also realized the challenge that you were going to face to grow it to where you wanted to be?
Right. The challenge, my gosh. A couple things. Number one was that there were no systems in place. Okay, when I mean a guarantee system, well, the great news was because I came from the Boston office of American Express, that was the number one office. So I had systems there that I could just plug in. But there had to be systems in place. Number two is I needed to create an environment of that leaders matter. Because the leaders weren't necessarily seen as a value add when we first got there. So we're very much into leadership and leadership development. And we had systems, again, for something like that. But the big thing, quite frankly, was buy-in. So I had this vision. I'll never forget the first day I walked in there. I painted this compelling vision. At least I thought it was compelling. I was on a roll. I don't know if anybody was listening. But I did this rah-rah speech. Was say, look, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. This is what's in it for you. This is what you can expect from me. And oh, by the way, if we get there, let me tell you what it means to you in terms of how you're going to feel and what's going to be for your career. And we had to get buy-in. And now I will share with you that I didn't get 100% buy-in. Out of the 32 people, we actually had to fire 13 people the first couple of weeks because they chose not to follow the new system.
Wow. Do you think this notion of buy-in is a pretty common problem that many companies have?
No question. No question. So if any leader, by the way, again, a leader could be, think about a corporate leader from a manager all the way up to a C-suite executive. A leader could be a professor, a teacher, a little league coach, a Girl Scout leader, a parent. Okay. Everybody who's a leader is trying to influence behavior one way or the other. And to be successful, I think no matter what level you are, no matter what position you are, you have to have this compelling vision that people get why they're doing what they're doing. If they don't understand the why, there's no reason in the world why they're going to give best efforts.
Let's also talk about another piece that you were dealing with, or whether that was in the beginning or obviously over time. And that is having younger folks in the workforce. So in this day and age of multi-generational segments working together, how do you actually effectively manage such a diversified workforce? Because each generation has different styles and expectations.
You're touching on the biggest gap that most people don't actually realize. So by the way, in today's day, right now, the average leader is late 40s, early 50s, brought up a certain way, motivated a certain way, trained a certain way. But I don't know if you know this, but in the next couple of years, 70 to 75% of the global workplace will be the millennials, who've got an attention span is 8 seconds. They crave short video while they learn, and quite frankly, they want to be entertained. And the biggest gap out there is that if these two groups can't connect, especially emotionally, the millennials are going to check out and they're going to become disengaged and they're ultimately going to quit. And the cost of recruiting, training, and retaining is through the roof these days. I saw a study saying it was a $500 billion global issue.
Wow.
Okay, so it's a big deal. So to answer your question about what we did, we hired right out of college. So we go to all the colleges. We sit in little 8x8 rooms with the clock behind you, and by the way, we knew within 17 seconds if we were going to hire you, because we were looking for what I think it's now termed soft skills. They look you in the eye, they show up on time, they shake your hand, they follow up, they answer the question. And what we didn't know, this is back in, let's say, 98, 99 time period, is about 80% of my entire organization was the beginning of the millennial generation.
Mm.
Okay, so it was funny is we used to teach 3-hour classes, 4 times a week, just from a training perspective. And all of a sudden, I started seeing people starting to check out. They weren't paying attention. They weren't as engaged in what they were reading newspapers. I think the cell phones started coming out. They just started playing with the cell phones, whatever. And what was really, really interesting is I said, we're not doing anything differently from the way we train and the way we teach. Why aren't people getting it? And we started doing some research, and what we found, to your point, was that it was an entirely different generation who demanded to be trained, engaged, motivated, communicated to differently than how I was trained. So we had to pivot to address this, because if we didn't, we were going to lose all of them. And as you know, in a world where retention is everything, if you start losing people, that's not good for your environment and your culture.
Right. And sadly, I think many organizations, while they acknowledge the importance of company retention, they're having a really hard time understanding what to do about it, or maybe sometimes not always taking immediate action like they need to.
Yeah. And I got to tell you that I'll never forget the meeting, a leadership team meeting that we had. And I said, guys, if we don't change, everything we built up over the last 6 or 7 years is going to go for naught. Because people are just going to leave in droves because they're not happy.
But therein lies the rub to me, because when you realize there needs to be a significant change, and based on what I'm hearing is that it has to be a wholesale change, there's a lot of fear that comes into play when you have to completely pivot and shift the way that you're used to doing things. That's scary for people. So in light of knowing that, what did you do to break through that inertia and realize a different way of engaging this very diverse workforce?
Well, it's funny. IBM has done a study over the years, and it basically said, what does it take? What attributes are the future CEOs and people that run organizations have to have? And do you know what the number one thing that comes up each and every year?
What?
Creativity.
Oh, makes sense.
Being creative, being innovative is the number one thing people have to do. And so people that are kind of stuck in, we've done this thing for 400 years and this is the way we're always going to do it and it's my way of the highway. I got to tell you, they're going to get hit by a Mack truck someday. Because the workforce generation, but it's not only the workforce, think about colleges, the students want to learn a certain way. Athletes want to learn a certain way. And it's not the old way of doing things, at least in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did is it's interesting. I had a goal that I wanted everybody to know our principles and our values. So because I figured that if they knew our principles and values, make good decisions, integrity, service, people are important, the value of collaboration, I want you to be courageous. These are some of the principles and values that I had. I'm like, how do I make these things come alive to people? Because what I really wanted is I wanted people when they were by themselves with nobody else around, I wanted them to be able to make great principle-based decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm saying, okay, so let me summarize my problem. So I had a decentralized workforce, 200 plus offices. I had a millennial generation workforce. I had leaders that were young and less tenured. I'm talking late 20s, early 30s. We had goals that we had to hit each and every year as an organization, and I wanted to have a life.
Lots of things that typically probably wouldn't all come together very easily.
Exactly. So that was kind of, that's the shape of what I had. So I decided to be creative. So I love movies. Do you like movies, Connie?
I do.
Okay. So I'm the type of guy when I go to Regal or AMC, I get goosebumps. I remember the movie lines. I remember the scenes. I remember how I felt. I remember watching Braveheart one time when he's got his face painted and saying, we're going to do this for Scotland, and everybody got all excited. And I said to my wife, I said, I just wish all 1,600 people were watching this movie right now because of the emotion that I felt and the excitement I felt. And so what we used to do is we used to send out a weekly theme-based email to all 1,600 people. And the themes started with my principles, my values. And so I would say, hey guys, this week's about courage. And I would type up why courage was important and relevant. And I'd say, it kind of reminds me of the movie Braveheart. And for those you've never seen before, it's about X, Y, and Z. And as you're watching this scene, I'd like you to share with me the most courageous decision you ever made in your life. And we would email this out once a week, by the way, for 20 years. We did this. And what was amazing was when we emailed this out, we would get back 200 to 300 stories a week from people that usually had nothing to do with business. They would say, hey, when I was 9 years old, here's what happened to me. And these stories were very personal, very emotional. And we would take those stories, and with your permission, of course, we take the best 2 or 3 of the week and we would share them with everybody else. And you could imagine what that did for the culture and the environment. People felt connected. They felt part of something. They felt as though they shared a moment. And so, for example, if you were my Virginia Beach office and you were having a really bad day, I didn't necessarily have to rely on the junior VP to take care of you because everybody else, because they could read your faces, actually became a leader without necessarily being a leader. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what we started doing, and it was so cool because what happens is it built a lot of transparency in the organization. Again, transparency leads to trust, and when you have a trusting environment that deeply cares, and I use the word genuinely cares, that genuinely cares about one another, I think you can do great things, and that's what we proved.
Scott found a unique way to motivate his young workforce through the power of movies. This creative, out-of-the-box approach changed the old paradigm to foster a more connected and transparent environment. It was ultimately his desire to truly make a difference.
I'm thinking about my personal legacy, and I want to impact millions and millions and millions of people. And that's why I made the decision to start MovieComm.
Scott also knew the importance of having a compelling culture. Next, Scott shares what else he did to create and foster a culture at Amex that was all about showing you care and doing something about it. Let's also talk about this notion of culture a bit more. We know culture is very critical to motivating employees, engaging employees. What were the things that you saw that was missing in the culture when you first got to that DC office? And what did you do to start to change that?
When I got there, it's funny, you make me remember back to the early 90s when I remember the emotions I felt when I was walking around the office. The work ethic wasn't there. It wasn't dynamic. It wasn't loud. Like I like a buzz when you walk in. It was important for me, at least in my mind, that when you walked into the office, you felt 3 feet off the ground just because of the noise and the buzz.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a cultural perspective, people didn't understand why they were doing what they were doing, and it was very much everybody for themselves, if you will. I have my personal goals. I'm going to try to do whatever I need to do to make me win. And I wanted everybody to kind of come together. So here's what happens to all of us if the organization wins. And then here's how you're a key component of this entire thing. So that was one. The second one was I learned this thing way back when, which is called Witty Withy, which stands for what do you want for yourself? It's something we did at American Express, taught by the great Doug Lennox, who was my boss's boss way back when. And what it was we would have individual conversations with every single employee. And it basically asked, what's important to you personally this year from a personal perspective, from a self-development perspective, and from a business perspective. Because what we learn is if we can figure out what you personally want and we can help you, enable you to get that, you'll be happier personally and you'll be happier professionally. And when you have that happiness level, again, you're going to give best efforts, which leads to that long-term profitability piece that we talked about and win-win for everybody. So those two things are the first two things that we did when I got in there to help drive the culture.
If I go back to that moment in time when you were at the new office in DC, you realized there was an engagement problem. You probably also realized there was a communication challenge. What did you specifically do to turn that around so quickly?
Okay, good question. So a couple things. One of the ways we were measured was based on employee engagement scores. And this is usually a survey that goes out once a year. Mostly big companies do it because the executive leadership team, C-suite, wants to know, get an idea what the heartbeat of the organization is. And it's a list of about 300 questions. Usually Gallup is one that sends them out. And then about out of the 300, there's actually only 12 that really, really get to the heart of the matter. It's called the Q12. So when I first saw our employee engagement results, it was like, oh my gosh, this is not good. But what we knew was for every 1% increase in engagement from my organization was equivalent to about $2.6 million in profitability.
Mm.
Okay, so we paid very, very close attention to what people were thinking, what people were feeling. When there were gaps in the organization based on the feedback, what we did was addressed it head on. We had a big meeting. We brought everyone together. I said, look, guys, here's based on your feedback. Here's what we're doing well, and here's what we need to shore up. And then here are our priorities and our action plans after that. And by the way, here's how I could use your help in making that vision come true so we have the best organization out there.
Scott indicates the importance of having a vision that everybody buys into in order to motivate and guide your team. As you mentioned earlier in the podcast,
you have to have this compelling vision that people get why they're doing what they're doing. If they don't understand the why, there's no reason in the world why they're going to give best efforts.
But what does that really entail? Scott now tells us what he believes it takes to create that momentum.
I think you need to have a strategy that's simplistic in nature, because you don't want to lose people in part of that strategy. I think people need to be very, very clear about what their roles are. This is what I expect from you, and this is what you could expect from me. There's got to be ongoing accountability, and then quite frankly, I think the most important thing of everything is communicating. Is how you engage people to give best efforts on an ongoing basis. And when you communicate effectively with people, I think you'll get best efforts. And best efforts historically leads to, as you know, loyalty and trust. And those numbers long-term with a long tail get you the profitability you're looking for.
And why do you feel that leaders may have a challenge in creating that vision?
Do you know the old 80-20 rule in business?
Mm-hmm.
The business comes from 20% of the people. At American Express, we used to call it the 10-80-10, where 10% of the people are rock stars. No matter what they did in life, they were successful. And then 10% of the people were probably in the wrong gig.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have everybody else in the middle. And the successful people are the ones who can move the people in the middle, because it's the vast majority. It's called factorial. If you can move people just a small amount, you'd be great. The challenge is, how do you do that with a less tenured leadership team, because everybody else got promoted out, and with you not being on the road all the time? Because I got to tell you, part of it for me, the other balance for me was my kids were young at the time, and I didn't want to be this absent father.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be around. So that was also part of the challenge. But going back to that 10-80-10 rule, I think that can be true for almost any position. So in leaders, there are 10% of leaders who just get it. Okay. And they do it naturally. And then there are 10% of leaders who are probably in their position because they hung tough long enough, or there was a gap. And people think that their bosses think that just because you're really good at something, we're now going to put you in a position to go train and lead other people. But a lot of times that bottom 10% is what we call unconsciously competent. They have no idea why they're as good as they are. Mm-hmm. And there's no training, and they're actually put in the position for the wrong reason. And in most cases, they just won't make the impact. But the 80% in the middle, the reason why most organizations, I think, don't succeed with the 80%, which is what you really want, is because there's not a lot of effective training. There's no systems in place to help leaders develop on an ongoing basis. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, a lot of old stuff, quite frankly, that's out there that we used to teach a lot. Situational leadership, effective communication, how to get proper feedback, that type of stuff. But in my experience, there are a number of organizations, probably the vast majority, that don't use money or budget or resources to train that 80%. And that's why I think there are gaps.
So you talk about the fact that many organizations aren't effectively training their leaders. So in order to be effective from the strategic vision to execution, would you say that is really the critical piece that's missing, that there needs to be this investment in effectively training your leaders? So the only way that they can be a good leader, or I should say, the only way they can effectively engage your employees is ultimately to know how to be a good leader.
I think there's very much something to that. I would call that 1B. But can I tell you what 1A is?
Yes.
1A is, and don't laugh, but this is just me, is you have to genuinely care. And I triple underline the word genuinely, because most organizations just have that next mentality. If it doesn't work out, next, and people and people feel as though they're like another brick in the wall, according to Pink Floyd. And they feel that becomes part of the environment, because if you don't genuinely care, nothing else matters. You could have all the systems and people in the world, but no, I think if you do genuinely care about your people and about growth and where you want to go as an organization, then part two, you have to have systems in place. And one of the systems that I think is critical to any success you have is an incredible leadership development program. And we had that at American Express, one of the greatest companies of all time.
That's great. What other recommendations do you have for folks looking to sustain this momentum that they now may have created by really engaging their employees? You found a way through these movie clips, but what other tools or methods do you think they would need to employ in order to continue that momentum of engaging employees?
A couple of takeaways. Like, for example, if I took over another organization besides the one I'm running right now, there were three things that I would do. Number one was I would create this compelling vision that if I called you at 4 a.m. in the morning and I said, "Hey, Connie, what's our vision?" you could repeat it. So everybody has to be on the same page about where the company's going. That's number one. So if I was a consultant, I walked into your organization, and I said, let me talk to 10 people, and I asked them, what's the vision of the organization? I guarantee you 8 of them couldn't answer it right now. Okay, so that is guaranteed number one. Number two is that you want to make sure people understand what the company stands for. What is your principles? What is your values? How you get that through to people comes down to creativity, whether it's email blast, using movie clips like MovieComm does, my company, having pictures on the wall, the old success story pictures on the wall, because that helps people make principle-based decisions when they're by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing is you want to get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off of it. Okay. So change, you have to embrace change. Change is good. Change is healthy. And so for some, you made a point earlier, for some, change takes courage. Okay. Because people are really afraid to make change, especially dramatic change, because they're afraid for their jobs. And if you have that mentality, I think you'll only go so far. Versus if you have that go for it mentality and it's well thought out and it's strategic in nature and it's aligned with everything that you stand for, then I think you'll change the world. And those are the big three things that I would start with.
And lastly, what's the best way that listeners can connect with you, Scott?
Go to our website, www.moviecom.com. It's MovieComm with 2 M's.com. You can call me directly, 703-433-1226, 703-433-1226. And we'd love to give you a personalized demo. I would also share with you that if you go on the site, there's a free trial, no credit card required. We can go play and browse and create as much as you want, just so you get a feel of how it works.
And is there an email too that they could reach out to you if that's how they'd like to contact you?
Yeah, get in touch with Scott, D as in David, I, G as in Gary, I, at moviecom.com.
Great insight, Scott. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It takes a clear vision to get the universal buy-in you need. And when everybody understands why they're doing what they're doing and how that aligns to the principles and values of your company, you create the business momentum you want. But you may have to employ a creative approach, like movie clips, to drive that engagement and have everybody on the team embrace those values that are core to your organization. That may require change, but change is good. Change is healthy. Because in the end, what matters as a leader is showing you genuinely care. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. Tune in to our next episode with Scott, where he shares his story on what inspired him to ultimately start MovieComm, a SaaS-based technology company that helps leaders lead through the power of Hollywood movie clips. And just a reminder that you can connect with Scott by email at scottdigi@moviecom.com. That's Scott, D-I-G-I, at MovieComm.com. If you want to hear previous episodes or even get show notes from this episode, visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.